Podot.
Welcome to A Pod Too Far, where we relive the days when there were only 4 channels and one of them was always showing a war film. I'm Robert Hutton, and I've got a plan to get 250 episodes of this podcast under the wire and scatter them across the country. With me is Duncan Weldon, who aims to see Berlin from the ground and the air before we've finished. That's right, it's Christmas, and we're watching The Great Escape. Duncan, what does The Great Escape mean to you?
You're going to claim it's a Christmas movie. Now, I think this is tenuous.
It's a British Christmas movie.
I'm prepared to accept that Die Hard is a Christmas movie. I would even, sort of within our wheelhouse, be prepared to accept that The Battle of the Bulge is a Christmas movie. It's set in December. There is snow. This is a film which was shown every Boxing Day when I was a child, but I'm still not quite sure that makes it a Christmas movie.
In my mind, it's a Christmas. In my mind, literally, Steve McQueen jumping over things on a motorbike means I'm opening presents.
You have a strange view of the nativity, Rob. There's no.
So the first thing is, this was the great war film of our childhood, surely.
Yeah, and every prisoner of war film which comes afterwards is essentially a derivative of this. It just establishes, the first duty of a prisoner to escape. No, it's not. That's a line from The Great Escape, which we now will just think is true.
It's not. It's interesting. It actually wasn't the first prisoner of war movie made. There's Stalag 17, which is a Christmas movie set in a prisoner of war camp at Christmas. Stalag 17 opens with a complaint that there are no movies about prisoners of war, which now feels very odd, because after that there were an awful lot of them. There's the Wooden Horse, there's the Colditz story, classically, which actually has a lot of elements. And the opening shot of this, I remember when I was watching the opening shot of this for this podcast, I suddenly thought, what I want is a supercut of opening shots of prisoner of war films where they pan up and over the wire and across the huts.
Yeah,
because we did that in Escape to Victory. You do that in this one. Probably don't quite do that in Colditz because
you do that in Chicken Run.
You do that in Chicken Run, which is this film.
Yeah.
And I mean, have you watched Chicken Run with your children?
I have, and I wanted to be watching The Great Escape, but
because there's a whole level of Chicken Run which is basically Great Escape jokes that pass children by.
Yeah, because Chicken Run is one of those films which is allegedly targeted at children, but has enough jokes to keep the parents on side. Yeah.
So. And my other problem with this film, actually, as a Christmas film, was that I was never allowed to watch it on Boxing Day because my parents always insisted that we go for a long walk across the Yorkshire Dales. So this is one of these films that I sort of seen bits of, and I've seen the end of quite a lot, because if we really hustled up Penn Hill and down again, we could get back to watch the final half hour. But I sort of feel like I don't know whether I actually watched it sort of from beginning to end until possibly I was in my 20s.
A big moment for you, I'm sure.
A big Made in 1963. John Sturges has wanted to make it by this stage for a decade, but couldn't get any backing because people didn't think there was any money in prisoner of war films. No. And then he makes The Magnificent Seven, and essentially he says they would let me make the phone book after that. So they were going,
which might have been more exciting than the first half of this film.
That's I'm going to challenge that. They were going to film it in California, where they'd found 3 pine trees together, and then Sturges' assistant goes to Germany and says, actually, you know what looks like the Black Forest? The Black Forest looks like the Black Forest. So they build a prisoner of war camp. They clear an area of the Black Forest and they build a prisoner of war camp, because that's partly what this podcast is about. It's about the days when, instead of somebody sitting there with a mouse sort of doing all of this on a computer, if you wanted a prisoner of war camp, you had to build one. And they get...
So that's 1962. There's a few people about who still know how to do this.
Yes. Well, so in the cast, you've got Donald Pleasance, who was a prisoner of war. The James Cavell, who wrote the screenplay, was a prisoner of war of the Japanese. The Germans, I think, had largely been prisoners of war of us and the Russians. It's become absolutely eternal. It's been used in adverts. It is, as you say, now the film. I was thinking, what are our moments you have to come in? I don't think there is a moment in this film where you can sit down and not think, oh great, I'll just stay with this for the next. I mean, I would say right from the opening scene. Now,
right. I mean, so I think the first half drags quite a bit. It's fun, but it's not gripping. You know, I can imagine walking in, seeing a few minutes, and walking out again. Whereas once you're into the actual escape,
Right.
then it's all, thriller,
So
action.
sort of from the moment of Ives' death or something,
Yeah,
you're
yeah,
thinking.
yeah.
Okay. But they went to great trouble on that because there is this claim at the start that all the details of the escape are accurate.
I mean, it's quite a tenuous claim, isn't it?
It's quite tenuous. So there's this well, we used composite characters, we created composite characters, but and then they don't then explain what that is, because you might say that Steve McQueen on a motorbike is part of the escape, and that's clearly not accurate. Is it a bit true?
Well, there's this wonderful story that at some point in the 2000s, lots of people who'd been in the prison camp were brought back to the prison camp for the anniversary, and they watched the film. Many of them had seen it, many of them hadn't seen it, and the general feeling of sort of former inmates at the Stalag was the first half, like quite an accurate portrayal of life in a prisoner of war camp, and the attempts to escape and the build up and all the methodology around that. The second half of the film, it's not quite what they recognised from that. Which is, I think, why I find, semi-accurate portrayal of life in a prisoner of war camp doesn't necessarily make for gripping cinema.
I have a question about the decision to say at the start, oh, well, this is accurate, because Rogue Heroes, which is on TV as we're recording about the SAS, opens with this claim that this is a true story, and the bits that you'll find hardest to believe are all true. As I'm writing a book about one of the people who features in it, and almost everything about him is made up. For me personally, that's simply not the case.
You may not be the target audience.
Would it be better if they just didn't make this sort of
No,
claim?
because it's a great film. I mean, it's strange. It's like all of those debates you've got now about, The Crown on Netflix, and how, if you're presenting something, something which is presented as drama set in history, I think is different to historical drama. And I think if you're selling this as, this is a dramatization of things that really happened, then you do have to be careful and stick as close as you can to the facts. I think there's no problem at all with making a film set in the Second World War, which is maybe tangentially based on real events, but then goes off in its own direction. I think where you run into problems is when you have things like these disclaimers at the front, which I think give this sort of misleading signpost that you're essentially watching a dramatization of real events when, you're not.
I've decided that I can enjoy Rogue Heroes so long as I think of it like I think of Gladiator. But having decided that, I did then realise that I sat at the end of Gladiator saying I don't actually think it was like that.
Yeah.
but you can sort of imagine that maybe the big battle sequences in Gladiator are might have been what it was like to face the Roman legion, all of that sort of thing. That looks quite fun. The Great Escape, I like the way that they open almost immediately. The opening 10 minutes, you get a good who is everyone's character, which is not easy to do.
Without it all being now for some expositional dialogue.
It's very elegantly done. These are the kinds of people that they are. Come on, Danny and I have got a blitz on. It completely sets up. This is what it's going to be like. Steve McQueen.
Yeah.
Enormously
Steve McQueen,
cool.
fantastic. And it's a film which justifies the length, I think. Despite I think the first half drags at times, but it would be a poorer film without it. As an overall package.
You sort of have to show that getting 250 people out or getting 70 people out is harder than getting 5 people out.
Yeah.
And
it is a long film.
It is a long film. It's that's why you can walk up Penn Hill and back and still be back in time for the end of it. But is anyone harder to work with than Steve McQueen? Have you read about his behaviour on set?
No, go on.
So Steve McQueen's big problem was, am I the hero of this movie or not? and essentially goes on strike, I think, for about a month. And while his screenwriters are brought in to rewrite the script so that he and they.
I didn't realise there was this parallel between Steve McQueen's behaviour on set and the behaviour of his character in the film. There's no sort of tangentially involved, but wants to be more important. There's no.
And when he comes, essentially, according to the other actors, sort of when he comes back, it turns out more or less that the script hasn't really changed. But someone has sat Steve down and said, "Don't worry, Steve, you are the hero of this film. It's fine." Steve McQueen, really cool, possibly quite hard to work with.
Yeah.
I mean, that was
Who'd
Richard
have thought?
Attenborough's
Yeah.
take, I think, as well. He never worked with anyone who was as difficult, he said. How much fun was it to be in a POW camp? Being in a POW camp looks brilliant.
Well, I don't know, like, if the alternative is flying Lancaster bombers over the Reich and breathing anti-aircraft fire, I can imagine worse ways to spend the war, to be honest.
I mean, one of the things that this film, I think, completely sets up is the idea of POW camp as sort of like school.
Yeah.
I didn't go to this kind of school, but if you went to this kind of school, it feels like this is the kind of school that it was.
Yeah, there are regiments and routines, and
playing pranks on the teachers. I think that when we were sort of 7 or 8, there was a feeling that school was a bit like a prison camp, and that we were the POWs, and there was a sort of kindly headmaster, but all sorts of goons in between.
I can see that. Your first duty wasn't to escape, though, I hope. There's no...
No. Richard Attenborough's character is based on a real person, Roger Bushell.
Yeah.
Name is changed to Squadron Leader Bartlett in the film, but that's clearly who it is, who obviously was a bit mad. And actually gives this great speech in real life, apparently, which isn't in the film, where basically says, we all ought to be dead because we've all been shot down. We've been given a second chance, and we have to use this precious extra life to make life difficult for the enemy. He hated the Germans. He has escaped a number of times. He hides out in Czechoslovakia, where he has a thing with a resistance woman who then accidentally sort of betrays him because he sort of revealed to her that his plan is not to come back and marry her after the war. And she goes and complains to her boyfriend, who is, it turns out, an informer. And I mean, no, she suffers for it. I think her family, members of her family are killed, I think. So he hates the Nazis. And I think Attenborough does him quite well as somebody who's on one side of the madness line or the other. And you can't.
But this is the weird thing about the film, isn't it? It's the use of these composite characters or just slight name changes. But then sort of amid it all, you've got the bigging up of the Steve McQueen role. And, the weird thing is to give when you step back, the weird thing from sort of a filmmaking perspective is, to give it a bigger audience appeal in the United States, what they've really done is just completely cut out the Canadians, who were actually a huge part of the actual real escape. Yes. The Canadians just gone. John's going to replace all Canadians with Americans and big them up.
I mean, there were Americans involved in digging the tunnel, I think, but the Americans had moved from the camp by the time that the breakout took place.
Whereas an awful lot of Canadians, you would just completely
miss. Basically American.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
Who can tell?
Exactly.
Well, let's go then immediately to the Cooler King Award for the most gratuitous American character.
Well, it's quite obvious in this case, isn't it? I mean, there's no... In fact, with his own screenwriters making sure he's got a bigger role.
Gets his mate. So his mate, who was a motorbike stunt rider, he sort of comes in one day and says, "Would you like to come to Germany for months and jump over the wire for me?" Yes, I mean, Steve McQueen is great. Steve McQueen is the coolest character, and Steve McQueen is the person you want to be. Also, you are sort of sitting there watching it as an adult the fifth or sixth time. Why is Steve McQueen the person who's opening the tunnel? He hasn't dug the tunnel?
Yeah. But that's the sort of thing, isn't it? He's this very cool American character who's obviously going to appeal to American audiences. But if you're watching this film as a Brit, what lesson do you take away from it? So the Brits do all of the hard work, all of the planning. They're the ones forging papers, digging tunnels, hiding soil, whatever. And then Steve McQueen sort of rocks up. And
America will rock up in 1942 and take the glory.
And what happens at the end? We just get this sort of end montage of all of the British characters who've put in all of the work being horribly killed in one way or another. Whereas Steve, nearly got away, lives to fight another day. Just this chancer who turns up, does none of the hard work, and then sort of gets away with it. Sorry.
We laugh because it's funny. I mean, there's James Garner is in it as well. Is sort of with the great. Actually, this is a great James Garner role, the Scrounger. Who he'd been in the Korean War, I think, and claims that he was a Scrounger for his unit. Though whether we believe that, I'm not sure we do. But no, but the most gratuitous American character. The thing is, you could live with Hendley. You could live with James Garner's character as right. Well, they've had to put an American in.
Yeah.
You know, they've given him this charming job because he's a charming guy. The Steve McQueen role is just.
But it makes the film.
But it does
yes, make the film.
But it makes the film. And if you didn't have him jumping on a motorbike, which is definitely not how anyone escaped. Who also, he has no, all the rest of them have got uniform and papers and all of this stuff, and he's going out in a t-shirt and jeans.
Yeah, fun.
And he's just, he's just going to make it. And sort of, he's going to bike to the border, and
Jump
then
over the barbed wire, off you go.
And then suddenly he's on his motorbike and he decides to get the entire German army to follow him. For reasons that are not entirely clear.
For reasons of drama.
Nothing about Steve McQueen's escape works. It's incredibly well cut so that it makes it look like he jumping the wire, and insurance people wouldn't have let him jump the wire. I suspect that he would quite cheerfully have tried, actually. Best death. So I've got Ives or Ashley Pitt or Colin.
Yeah, I mean,
Ives is the most depressing death.
Yes, I think that's right.
Ives is the one I worry about watching this with my children.
Really?
That they would cry when Ives dies. I mean, I think I cried when Ives died.
But there's a lot of this sort of sad. I mean, this to me is the really sad thing about the film. You've got all of these people who've put so much effort into this, and we've watched their preparations for what feels like hours. And then it just goes wrong, and they die.
Colin. I mean, I'm inclined to give it to Colin because it's slightly. He thinks he can see freedom. He thinks he's ready, and he does. He can't see the sniper, obviously. Which is so. And and he says thank you to Hendley and so on. Ashley Pitt's a heroic death. That's David McCullum's wife left him for Charles Bronson after meeting him on this film. Apparently. But he was still very happy to be in it. He said,
There we go.
On balance, got him the man from U.N.C.L.E., I guess. Speaking about Charles Bronson, so one of the scenes in this actually that I realised has stayed with me is just before their escape. There's the moment where Charles Bronson decides he can't face going through the tunnel again.
Yes. Claustrophobia and collapses. Yeah.
And his friend Willie comes out to stop him. And why do I think war films are so important? It's because I think that war films told us who we were in the 50s and 60s and 70s. And I think that watching this film in the 80s, watching this moment where one friend risks his life to save another friend from doing something stupid, that's where I watched that and I thought, oh right, this is who I am supposed to be. This is this is a model for good behaviour. And I don't know whether that's how we did behave during the war, but that, and then right next to it, you've got Hendley saying Colin's not blind if he's with me.
Yeah,
and
but this is the thing. It's
that.
A film about comradeship, and it's a very untypical Charles Bronson role.
Yeah,
this sort of strange moment of vulnerability, which I think is one of the things that lifts the film.
Yes, playing completely against type. Yeah. As somebody who's scared, and he's really good at being scared in the tunnel as well. When he's in the tunnel, you think, get him out. He's going to blow the whole thing. But yes, that sort of that feeling that that what we ought to be is people who are willing to sacrifice ourselves to save our friends. I think that's a moment where actually it does lift this film above the ordinary. Best meme. I call this the Good Luck Award for Best Meme. And the best meme is surely the SS man saying, good luck.
Yeah, I mean, there's no competition here.
Well, you say that. So the one I've always wanted, the GIF I've always wanted, and I can never find.
Talk about a film you haven't found. There's not a GIF you've wanted somewhere.
There's a GIF.
If any listeners are good at making GIFs.
Yes, my fantasy listener is out there GIFing each week. It's Richard Attenborough saying, open up, Harry, we dig round the clock. I'm going
to have to stop you there. When would you use such a GIF?
I think it's something I used to say when, when we had a lot of words to write all at once. I think that's stiffest upper lip. Can't give this to an American. They don't. They're all over the place. But
it's a film of stiff upper lips, isn't it? I mean, it's a film of stiff upper lips and comradeship, and a sort of boisterous American doing his own thing. That's fundamentally what this film is.
I'm inclined to go for James Donald, Group Captain Ramsey, just sort of at the end.
Yeah,
50,
okay.
you know.
Yeah.
How many wounded?
Yeah.
How many wounded? That's,
Yeah.
But actually, you could almost give it to von Luger, who at this point is more or less only just holding it together.
Yeah.
And sort of. And has a nice parting line. I think perhaps that you will see Berlin before I do, he says.
Yes.
Taken off to be shot. Nastiest Nazi. Von Luger is obviously a nice Nazi.
Yeah.
So I struggle to find the name of the actor who plays the Gestapo man because the credits on this film are a mess, and even on IMDb the credits are a mess, and particularly on the Germans. But I think that one of these Gestapo men is the model for the Raiders of the Lost Ark Gestapo man. I just think it's impossible to look at him saying, Group Captain Bartlett, without thinking of your man in the leather coat with the burned hand,
and also
taking on
and
Indiana
also
Jones.
your Gestapo men in Hello Hello.
Yes.
But again, it's never one of those ways the film establishes the genre, isn't it? You've got all of your prisoner of war. The establishing shot of the camp, all of like the escape committee and all of the routines and all of that. But then also some of your sort of stereotypical later war film characters, your Gestapo man in the leather coat.
There is a
slight accent.
There is a definite move. And again, we're less than 20 years after the end of the war.
Yeah.
And there's a definite move that you pick up in all of these to establish that there were sort of nice Nazis and nasty Nazis.
Yes.
And, and there were the good Germans who, they're fighting a war, running a prisoner of war camp. Obviously, you can't just let people escape. That's very much...
And this guy is the baddie, you can tell, because he's got a leather coat.
And there's a lot going on with saluting. And how you can tell how bad somebody is from how leather their coat is and how they salute. Judgment at Nuremberg, how many war crimes are committed in this film? I mean, this is actually a film about an actual war crime.
Yeah, I mean, you're killing prisoners, even if they attempt to escape. Open and shut, war crime. And so, the film ends with, essentially, war crimes.
And they hunted them down afterwards.
Yeah.
Reasonably successfully?
Yeah. I mean, this thing, one of these things, we call it the Great Escape. Well, sort of, kinda. I mean, it depends how are you defining success?
Do you think that is this a war film or is this a caper film? Because
I think you're right. I think this is actually, when I think about it, this is a caper film set during a war. I mean, it's got all of sort of the elements in some ways of a bank heist movie.
Yes,
it's about the planning leading up to the event, and that's actually
the assembling the team.
Yeah.
Everyone is a generic person. The gunman, the knight, the forger, and actually at the end they are the forger.
Yeah,
the manufacturer, the tunnel king.
Yeah, I think this might actually be a 60s caper film, which happens to be set in the 1940s.
Which brings us to the music, which is the reason why I thought this is it's quite caper music.
Yeah.
It's got a bit of martial stuff.
Yeah.
It has become incredibly evocative, that music, and sort of, I mean, it's England football again. We're recording this during a World Cup. Well, what is that tune saying to us?
I don't know, but in some ways it's a very appropriate sort of England World Cup song, isn't it? That, lots of planning, lots of hopes, lots of expectations. It's always going quite well, then it all falls apart at the end. I can see why England fans have latched onto it as their go-to tournament.
Yes, and it's the sort of thing you play it when you're 4-1 down.
Yeah.
But because somehow you might get away with it.
Yeah.
There's no real problematic moments in this, I think, but there aren't absolutely no women.
None.
Not only, I don't even think you see a woman. Maybe you see one on the train. Were there any women in Germany? It's just you don't see women. You don't see a woman in Paris. You could easily have had a woman at the cafe.
But for most of the film, this is one of the ones where for most of it makes sense.
Yes, no, completely. In the camp, that's all men. That's fair enough. In all men, guarded by men, all good. But you could easily have had a woman at the resistance lines that were the MI9 lines that were taking escapers out. Certainly had plenty of women in them. It's really interesting that no one in the early 1960s seems to have looked at the cast list and said, "Could we just write one in? That, given we're writing a motorbike scene in for Steve, a motorbike. Can we have a woman?" Which brings so we've talked a bit about how much they made up. The interesting thing I learned researching this actually is that although they're shown blackmailing the guards, actually some of the German guards sort of helped.
Were helpful.
Yes.
Yeah. The forgery, like the idea you can forge semi-authentic, German documents in a prisoner of war camp. I mean, it's quite hard. So there was an awful lot of help from members of the German resistance and the guards smuggling it in to get these forged documents, which is just sort of ignored from the film to give the agency to the prisoners.
Do we understand why they were doing that, or they were just anti-Nazi, or
just a general anti-Nazi Germans who were trying to be helpful?
Duncan, is this the operation that changed the course of World War II?
No, no. It's one, as we've discussed. This is a very fictionalized version of the operation. But I've also stepped back. Sort of the internal logic. Of these sort of captured airmen, certainly in the film and in some cases, no doubt in real life, was not to escape to get to freedom, but to escape to cause problems and tie down German resources, hunting for them.
Yes, this is what you said in my school books in the 80s, was that this was why you had to do this.
Yeah, exactly. But you've got to ask yourself, really, how many resources does it really tie down? Like, a few dozen airmen on the run. I mean, this is not a huge diversion of German resources into hunting.
The people who are doing the airman hunting are not the people who are doing the defending the beaches at Normandy.
Yeah, exactly. So it's sort of
Yeah.
So no, I don't think this is the one that changes the course of World War II.
We'll find it yet. Worth dying for. Does this film stand up to repeated viewing?
I think it actually does.
Yes, it does.
Think it does.
Yes,
more
really
enthusiastic
does.
than from me. But yeah, I think it does. It does. So this was when I rewatched it last week. It was probably the first time I'd seen it in about 10, 15 years. And, you remember every scene.
Yeah.
Once you get going, it's like one of those songs you hear and then suddenly the lyrics come back into your head. No, it does. It does. It is a good film. It is an enjoyable film. I don't think it needs to be, it's a film where if I walked in and it was halfway through, I would just sit down and enjoy it. But I'm not sure it's a film I would choose to put on from the start.
I have to say, I did cook dinner while watching the first half, because you can, if you know it, you can do other things.
Yes.
Yes. So there we are, The Great Escape. You can cook dinner in the first half. Second half's brilliant. Duncan and I are going to jump on our motorbikes now and make a break for the border. That final
Neither of us are Americans, so neither of us are going to make it anywhere near the border, Rob. That's the lesson of this film.
The thing, actually, that
Who's
I noticed...
this guy that's just turned up with his own bike? He'll probably be fine.
He'll go. But when we're caught, we will make that final grasp for freedom. That's one of the motifs of this film. Is Steve McQueen does it, Gordon Campbell does it, Donald Pleasance does it. Just the arm out, and so arm out. We'll say farewell for this week. That was A Pod Too Far with me, Robert Hutton, and Duncan Weldon. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe, and if you liked it, rate and review us. You can drop us a line at podtoofar@gmail.com or on Twitter @podtoofar. If you want to watch along with us, next time we're going to Greece for the Guns of Navarone.